On the 25th of April, 2014, a company in Burbank held a meeting. And in that meeting, they decided that 30 years of Star Wars never happened. Not retconned, not revised, deleted. Rebranded as Legends, which is the polite corporate word for we're keeping the merchandise and throwing away the stories. Gone in an afternoon. Grand Admiral Thrawn's war against the New Republic, the most intelligent villain the franchise ever produced. Gone. Luke rebuilding the Jedi Order, marrying, raising a son who falls. Gone. An entire extragalactic invasion that nearly ended the galaxy. Hundreds of novels, thousands of characters, 3 decades of people growing up inside a story that was allowed to age with them. And in its place, we were handed a map shrunk to a handful of planets, a resurrected corpse, and a war that reset everything our parents fought for in the first 3 films. This isn't a fan grudge. It's an inventory of what was taken. And once you see the list, you understand why so many people never forgave them. The announcement posted to StarWars.com was titled, "The Legendary Star Wars Expanded Universe Turns a New Page." That headline was doing a lot of diplomatic work. What the post actually said was that, under Lucasfilm President Kathleen Kennedy's direction, a newly formed story group would coordinate all future Star Wars storytelling, and everything published before that date would be reorganized under a non-canonical banner called Legends. The books would stay in print. What disappeared was their status, their place in the official galaxy. The announcement's exact language. Demand for past tales of the expanded universe will keep them in print, presented under the new Legends banner. That sentence is doing what corporate language always does when it's softening a demolition. Disney had completed its $4.05 billion acquisition of Lucasfilm on December 21, 2012. 18 months later, the EU was gone. The story group needed a clean slate for the sequel films. That rationale made business sense. The creative case is harder to construct, because what they cleared the slate of was this. Start where the EU did. May 1991. A novel called Heir to the Empire by Timothy Zahn, published by Bantam Spectra. The Star Wars franchise had been dormant since Return of the Jedi in 1983. No new adult fiction, no ongoing story. Most publishers passed, feeling the franchise had run its course. Then, Zahn's novel climbed to #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, reaching that top spot on June 30th, 1991. The trilogy, Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, The Last Command, would eventually sell 15 million copies. It didn't just prove there was an audience, it created the conditions for the special edition releases, the prequels, everything that followed. And at the center of it was a villain no one had seen before in this universe, Grand Admiral Thrawn. Full name, Mithra Nuruodo, a Chiss, blue-skinned, red-eyed from the unknown regions, and the only alien Grand Admiral in a human supremacist empire. One of 12 Grand Admirals in the Imperial Navy. 11 human, one who is simply better than all of them. That anomaly is itself a characterization. His abilities were too extraordinary for institutional xenophobia to override. What made Thrawn different from Vader or the Emperor wasn't firepower or force powers. It was method. StarWars.com's own official databank describes him as someone known for studying his enemies, including their art and culture, to gain tactical advantages often overlooked by his peers. In the canon novel, Thrawn Ascendancy, Chaos Rising, a younger Thrawn walks a colleague through a museum and argues that art reflects the soul from which strategies flow. That from art, one can discern the strengths and weaknesses of a culture's creators and extrapolate the tactics of entire cultures.
His office in Star Wars Rebels is stocked with art objects taken from cultures he's fighting. Holograms relevant to the Ghost Crew, weapons and armor from across the galaxy. Visual intelligence. The art tells him what the fight will look like before the fight starts. Zahn explained his design in a 2021 Star Wars Insider interview. He needed something different from Vader. No superweapon, no dark side, no rule through fear. He wanted a commander who led through loyalty, a strategic genius whose troops trusted him because he gave them real reasons to win. Dave Filoni, who brought Thrawn back into canon for Star Wars Rebels in 2016, put it plainly. You couldn't have grown up a Star Wars fan without encountering Thrawn in Heir to the Empire. It was a dark time when there weren't any more movies, and it blew our minds that there could be more. The recurring demand in fan discussions, more than a decade after the Legends announcement, remains specific. They should have just adapted the Thrawn trilogy. Not a vague wish for better movies, a named request for a named set of books. That precision tells you everything about the depth of the loss. Lucasfilm decanonized Thrawn in 2014. 2 years later, they recanonized him for Rebels. 4 years after that, he was in live action in Ahsoka. The sequel trilogy, meanwhile, offered Snoke, a scarred, imposing figure revealed in The Rise of Skywalker to be a puppet created by Palpatine. Rey's parentage went from nobody in The Last Jedi to Palpatine's granddaughter in Rise of Skywalker, an explicit reversal between films. Palpatine returned with a single line that offered no architecture. Somehow, Palpatine returned. These aren't creative risks, they're creative retreats. Writing that builds toward nothing because there was no coherent structure underneath. Thrawn never needed a retcon. His logic was consistent across the original Bantam trilogy, the 1997-1998 Hand of Thrawn duology, and new canon material written decades later. Same character, same method, same threat. The EU understood something the sequels refused to. Heroes don't stop existing when the credits roll. By 11 ABY, approximately 7 years after the Battle of Endor, Luke had established the Jedi Praxium on Yavin 4, the same jungle moon where the Rebel Alliance had destroyed the first Death Star. Kevin J. Anderson's 1994 Jedi Academy trilogy put him there, rebuilding an order from survivors of the Empire's purge. He makes mistakes, loses students to the dark side, has to rebuild after his own failures. EU Luke is powerful, but not infallible, and the novels track his course corrections across 3 decades. Mara Jade entered the story as his opposite. Introduced in Heir to the Empire as the Emperor's Hand, Palpatine's personal Force-sensitive assassin, she spends the better part of a decade moving from attempted killer to smuggler to rebel ally to Jedi apprentice. Luke proposed at the end of Zahn's 1998 novel, Vision of the Future. Their wedding was depicted in Union, a 1999 4-issue comic series written by Michael A. Stackpole, set on Coruscant. George Lucas had approved the marriage concept, first envisioned in late 1993. Their son Ben Skywalker was born in Greg Keyes' 2001 novel Edge of Victory, Rebirth, during the middle of a galaxy-wide war. The family that grew out of Heir to the Empire, Luke, Mara, Ben, wasn't a fantasy. It was the natural consequence of letting a hero live long enough to become a person. In The Last Jedi, Mark Hamill told director Rian Johnson something that made it into a May 2017 Vanity Fair cover story. I at first told Rian, I fundamentally disagree with every choice you've made for this character. The sequel trilogy's Luke is a reclusive hermit who briefly considered killing his nephew in his sleep and then exiled himself to an island, refusing to train Rey, dying while projecting an image of himself rather than showing up. The EU's Luke founded an order, married, raised a child, and kept fighting. The sequel trilogy gave him fewer living years of story than the original trilogy. The EU gave him 3 decades of earned complexity. Mara Jade Skywalker was killed in 2007 in Legacy of the Force, Sacrifice, by Karen Traviss, murdered by her nephew Jason Solo, who by that point had become the Sith Lord Darth Caedus. Jedi Master, Imperial Survivor, wife, mother. Her death was permanent, traumatic, and narratively consequential. It drove Luke toward the dark side and set the stage for Ben Skywalker's arc across 2 more novel series. Death in the EU carried permanent narrative weight rather than serving as a twist to be reversed in the next installment. That structural difference matters more than any individual character choice. The New Republic in the EU isn't a background institution that gets destroyed for spectacle. Michael A. Stackpole's Rogue Squadron novels, beginning in 1996, showed what actually happened between Return of the Jedi and the New Republic's consolidation of power. Grinding, expensive military campaigns, planet by planet. Coruscant wasn't retaken until roughly 7 ABY, and even that victory was poisoned. The retreating Imperials released the Krytos virus, a bioweapon engineered to kill alien species, deliberately designed to drain New Republic resources and fracture its ideals at the moment of apparent triumph. Michael P. Coob McDowell's Black Fleet Crisis trilogy, set around 16 to 17 ABY, depicted the New Republic's ongoing political vulnerability, coalition fatigue, xenophobic external threats, the weight of governing a galaxy that had been under authoritarian rule for 2 decades. By 25 ABY, the New Republic had been governing for over 20 years, accumulating the compromises and failures that come with actual governance. The Force Awakens destroys the New Republic's fleet and capital system, Hosnian Prime, partway through the film. No named senators the audience had reason to care about. No political structure with screen time. Trillions of lives extinguished as spectacle, and then the heroes were already discussing something else. The EU spent 20 years building something that mattered. The sequel trilogy destroyed a placeholder before it had existed on screen for 20 minutes, then reset to a rebel cell fighting a new empire with different names. The New Republic in the Legends timeline took Coruscant back from an enemy using bioweapons and kept fighting for 2 more decades. The New Republic in the sequels was a set piece. The new Jedi Order series ran 19 novels from October 1999 to November 2003, coordinated by Del Rey editorial director Shelley Shapiro and Lucasfilm managing editor Sue Rostoni, with contributions from R.A. Salvatore, Troy Denning, Matthew Stover, Aaron Alston, and a dozen other authors. The antagonists were the Yuuzhan Vong, extragalactic in origin, fully organic in technology, ships, weapons, armor, all living organisms, and invisible to the Force. Jedi couldn't sense them. The fundamental tool of every Star Wars conflict in recorded history simply didn't work. The first novel, Vector Prime, killed Chewbacca. A moon was pulled from its orbit and crashed onto a planet while Chewbacca was still on the surface. George Lucas personally approved the storyline. The editorial intention was explicit, stated by the planning committee. Deaths of major characters would be permanent and consequential, because in any book, at any time, someone could go. The 9th novel, Star by Troy Denning, killed Anakin Solo, Han and Leia's youngest son, a central protagonist, on a strike mission. Lucas approved that death too. Salvatore later reflected that he wouldn't go back and write that one again. He received thousands of angry letters. The audience was shaken. That was the point. A war that doesn't cost anything isn't a war. The EU was uneven.
Bantam Spectra was publishing 10 novels a year by 1996, and quality varied badly. Some stories were repetitive, some contradictory, some just thin. The honest version of this argument requires saying that. The Crystal Star exists, we know. But what the best of the EU produced, Zahn's Thrawn, Luke's arc across 3 decades, the New Republic's political complexity, the Yuuzhan Vong's structural challenge to everything Star Wars had been, was richer and more ambitious than what replaced it. The comparison holds on the merits of each side's strongest work. They didn't lose the stories. You can still buy them. The gold Legends banner is right there on Penguin Random House reprints, still in print today. What they took was the promise, the idea that the galaxy you grew up in would be allowed to keep growing, that the war your parents watched would mean something 30 years later, that Luke would get to become a master, and Thrawn would get to be the smartest man in the room. In one afternoon in April 2014, that promise became a footnote with a polite name. Legends. Read it back slowly. It's the word you use for the things you've decided to stop believing in. The fans never stopped. That's why, a decade later, the most liked comment on a video about a galaxy you'll never see is still 4 words long. Better than what we got. Subscribe for more stories like this.